The sale of the Minnesota Timberwolves from its owner, Glen Taylor, to A-Rod and billionaire Marc Lore is a masterclass in seller financing and creative finance strategies. A-Rod and Marc Lore, billionaire, are purchasing the Minnesota Timberwolves right now for $1.5 billion, but they're not coming up with the cash. They're not going to a bank to finance it. They cut this deal in 2021, and Glen Taylor, the owner, essentially is seller financing this and letting them buy chunks of the business over time until they can become the majority owners. This is a super fascinating case for me as a lawyer because this is now in dispute and Glen Taylor's having buyer's remorse and trying to get out of the deal. It's in litigation. The Minnesota Timberwolves have done amazing and he thinks they're now worth over $3 billion instead of the $1.5 billion he agreed to sell to A-Rod and Marc Lore for. All right, so I want to break down the deal that they cut back in 2021. Glen Taylor, the majority owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves, agreed to sell in chunks. He agreed to sell 20%, 20%, 40%, and then the final 20% as well. There's some other owners involved in here, but Glen Taylor's the majority owner right now selling, and that A-Rod and Marc Lore are going to get majority control from. A-Rod and Marc Lore have already acquired the initial two chunks of 20%. They currently own 40% of the Minnesota Timberwolves, but the big differentiator here is this next tranche of ownership, 40%, that A-Rod and Marc Lore are trying to acquire right now that is in dispute. This is huge because majority ownership of any business is when you actually have control. So this is what's in dispute. Glen Taylor still wants control. He's having buyer's remorse, so to speak. Team was worth a lot more. He's claiming they did not perform properly under the contract. Now, this is a common strategy anybody can use to buy any small business or real estate investment. You don't have to come up with all the cash on the purchase price. You don't have to have a bank come in and finance the deal. You can use existing debt on the property. You can use the seller's equity. In this case, Glen Taylor bought the Minnesota Timberwolves for like $90 million 20 years ago. He has tons of equity in the business here. He's essentially agreeing to seller finance this because he's contractually agreed to let the buyers buy the team from him over time at a predetermined price of $1.5 billion. They have a 4% escalator in the price of the payments every year, but that's pretty nominal here given the value of what the team is now worth from what they valued at the time of the purchase and agreed to in a contract during COVID in 2021 to what it's worth now with the Minnesota Timberwolves going almost all the way to the NBA Finals. Here's some lessons to be learned from this case and how to make sure you are structuring your deal. The first thing, if you're the buyer, is rather than making payments over time to acquire the business or real estate, acquire the entire ownership and negotiate seller financing. That's what we love to do with our clients that are buying businesses is they will acquire the business and agree to payments over time. That way they have ownership and control of the business and they've agreed to a predetermined amount that they will pay the seller. A-Rod and Marc Lore may have tried this and Glen Taylor may not have been game to let them take over ownership with him before he'd received a certain amount of payment. So that may have already been attempted in this situation and this was just where they got into in terms of negotiation. We've done that with lots of clients over the years where they acquire businesses with little money or no money down and the seller is essentially financing the balance where the buyer is paying them off over time. Another way to buy a small business or real estate is to acquire pieces of it over time. This is what was agreed to in the Timberwolves case where Glen Taylor agreed to sell chunks of it over time. This comes with inherent risks. The risk here is what has exactly happened in this case, which is the seller gets remorse. The value of the business or real estate goes up over time, so they're going to look for any technicality in the contract to get out. So whenever you're structuring a deal like this where you do not get ownership and control, but you have an agreed upon course of payments to get the ownership and control, you have to make sure you are complying with every little provision of that contract so that the seller does not have an opportunity to back out of the contract. Now, what Glen Taylor's claiming here in the Timberwolves case is A-Rod and Marc Lore did not perform in time. They did not get the necessary approvals from the NBA to get this majority ownership position, and as a result, he can back out of the contract. They're of course disputing this. They're in arbitration right now. And Glen Taylor's saying, look, they just don't have the money. But in comes one of our wealthiest billionaires in America, Michael Bloomberg, to save the day. He's worth over $100 billion, could actually cut the check to buy the team, not just has assets, which is the problem here with Marc Lore, the other billionaire here, and A-Rod is they don't have the actual cash to acquire the team. They may have the assets, but they're out seeking investors to try and buy the team. Michael Bloomberg has agreed to come in to fund the balance that is needed to acquire the team. He will get a certain percentage in the deal. Now, this brings me to another Another great point that we see with successful real estate investors and people buying businesses is they will use outside investors to bring in cash to get a piece of the deal. If it's a great business or a great deal, other people will be willing to bring in the cash needed to make the investment possible in exchange for some ownership. Maybe it could be debt or interest involved. But in this case, Michael Bloomberg's saying, I'll come in and save the day. It's going to cost you 10% of the team though. Now he will get ownership in the Timberwolves as long as this transaction goes through. I just love this example with the Timberwolves because it's a classic example of how you can buy a business, even an NBA team, under creative finance strategies without a bank, using other investors' money to come in and acquire the team and make an amazing investment. Right now, that investment almost has 100% return already. We'll see if A-Rod and Marc Lore can win in court, and I'll of course be coming back to let you know any details on the case. Remember, if you're buying a business or real estate, negotiate first for seller financing. Try to get the ownership to change immediately, and you agree to pay the seller over time. If you have to buy percentages over time as the business grows or certain markers are hit, that's fine, but make sure that contract is airtight, protecting you from a seller having remorse if the value goes up. This is the exact problem here in the Timberwolves case. And lastly, if you have a great deal or opportunity out there, remember, other people are going to be willing to invest in this deal. It's worth giving up your equity in the deal to another investor. Find yourself your own Michael Bloomberg to come and invest and save your deal. The structuring of the deal and the actual contracts that come out of it is what's critical here in buying and selling a business. We've helped hundreds of clients do that at my law firm, KQS Lawyers, and always giving you strategies here on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Strategies on how to grow and build wealth, protect your assets, save on taxes. We'll see you next time.